A few days ago, we reviewed the B25, a capable 2.5-inch drone that captures smooth cinematic 4K images. But little did you know it was powered by this, SpeedyBee's newest F405 all-in-one board. And with 40 amp ESCs, it's pretty impressive. So let's open this up and see what's new. Okay, so here it is, the F405 board, SpeedyBee's most powerful all-in-one to date. Now you have a traditional SpeedyBee box here. On the side here, it just says F405 40 amp all-in-one. And this says input 3 to 6S. So let's open this up and see what's inside. All right, so the first thing I see here is a quick start guide, and it's actually in color here, so pretty important. Now, most pilots take a look at this and just toss this to the side, never to find this again. But I do recommend you keep this for future reference, and we'll talk about that later, but this is one you do want to keep. Now, this is a pretty nice presentation on here. To the right, we have some accessories, the actual flight controller or all-in-one, and then a practice board. First thing I see here is a USB-C extension board, and it's usually found on some of their previous products, just like the B35. You have an external USB-C port here, similar to the B25, their most recent drone, and you also have a USB-C port on the side here. Now that's very convenient because this flight controller here is buried deep into the drone, and it's really hard to access the actual USB-C port on this flight controller. So they give you this so you can mount this USB-C port anywhere and have access to your flight controller pretty easily. Next, we have a power distribution board. And this is another accessory here by SpeedyBee. Now, this is a very compact flight controller all-in-one. And this allows you to add additional accessories or to power up additional accessories, whether it be GPS, VTX, or even receivers. Pretty cool, really not necessary, but if you are in a crunch for some power, this is what you'll need. Now on the bottom here, you have an external BEC if you intend to fly with 6S batteries and use a digital VTX. Now there is a VTX plug on this actual flight controller, but the output is VBAT. So if you are gonna use a 6S battery, the voltage might be too high for that. So you have this BEC to convert from that 6S voltage to around 9 voltage. So it's pretty cool. There's not much wiring involved. It's actually a plug and play, and they actually do include the harness for this. So if you are going to fly this with 6S, make sure to use that BEC. Now on the left here, you have an actual practice board. Now you don't see this too often. This is a little bit added cost for most manufacturers, but you do have a practice board in the exact same layout as this all-in-one, so pretty cool. Okay, and here it is, the F405 all-in-one, and this thing here is beautiful. It looks pretty impressive, guys. A little bit different from their original all-in-ones, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now below here, you have your accessories for the flight controller. You have a quality control card, so it was passed. And then below here, you have your accessories, and knowing SpeedyBee, they include a lot of accessories with their products. First thing here is some hardware. Looks like a M2 mounting hardware with some nylon nuts, some M220 a little bit longer, some more gummies, although we have some already included, already installed on our flight controller, and then we have some O-rings here as well. Below that, you have your other accessories. You have your actual XT30 connector, a pretty large capacitor right here, your actual DJI connector, which is good to just plug and play with your VTX. And then we talked about this little harness right here to actually convert from the 6S voltage to 9 volts right here. Here's your harness, your connector. Plug it one end, plug the other end to your flight controller, and then you have a BEC to go to your VTX. Really no soldering involved, even with this BEC here. And then you have two different shrink wraps, a clear and a black one. All right, nothing else in the box. Let's put this to the side. Okay, so let's take a closer look at this all-in-one board here. And this thing is pretty impressive. The first thing I noticed here is this big old heat shield on both sides here with this nice kind of purple color. Not a color you typically see with SpeedyBee products, but it's really stunning regardless, really nice. It's pretty beefy. So let's just weigh this and see how much it weighs here. And we're looking at 14 grams. So not too bad considering you have all these features in here and these two big old heat sinks on here. Now talking about the heat sink on both sides of the board, SpeedyBee says this is gonna allow for better cooling, as well as better splash or solder protection while you're soldering to the actual pads on here. Typically when you're soldering, especially in these smaller boards, you might have a little bit of a splash that goes from one place to the other, and that could cause a bridge to another component. So we really don't want that, and these heat sinks do provide that coverage and that protection. Now the heatsink on this all-in-one is pretty cool. no pun intended. And as you can see, it's actually writing on these heat sinks on here, telling you what some of the pads are. Nonetheless, these heat sinks are so large that some of the components are actually blocked and covered, so you can't see everything traditionally on a flight controller or ESC. And that's the reason why you do want to keep this quick start guide handy. Don't throw this away. We'll talk about this a little bit later again, but there's numerous reference to some of these pads, and they're so tight you can't see them, as well as some of the components, guys. So make sure you keep this handy in case you want to reference this in the future. Now, in each corner here, you have the rubber grommets already installed, which is typical of any SpeedyBee product, but you do have some spares here as well. Now, talking about rubber grommets, you have a 25 by 25 mounting solution, so this flight controller can fit into multiple drones and whoops. Now, typically when I go over a flight controller and ESC, I talk about all the components in the actual flight controller on board, but as you can see, the thing is completely covered, so you really can't see those processors or sensors in this flight controller. First thing here, you have your battery pads in here. They're pretty large, guys, very, very large, and pretty much easy to solder. You have the two small holes in here for your capacitor, and that's actually on both sides of the board in case you want to orient this in a different configuration. As you can see right above it, it does say 3 to 6S as we talked about before, so pretty capable flight controller. Now, on each corner here, you have your motor pads. They're pretty big as well. The only thing is that they're relatively close to the actual heat sink, so that might be a challenge, but it's also available on both sides of the board as well. Now, talking about the motor pads on this board, this all-in-one does feature a 40 amp ESC, and it is flashed with the BlueJ firmware, so you will have RPM filtering as well as D300 and D600 protocols. Now, on the top here, you have your plug for your VTX, and most modern flight controllers have this same plug, and that eliminates the soldering for your VTX, just plug and play to most modern VTX. Now, as I said before, and you can see it written right here, this voltage is VBAT. It says BAT, ground T3, R3, ground, and S bus. So this is set up for like a DJI system, but it is VBAT. So if you're gonna power up this flight control with this 6S battery, you will have to use this BEC right here. So just remember that. Now, finally, you have some ports here, some pads here for your actual USB-C external connector or extension. And you can just solder this to the harness and put this plug wherever you want. Now, on the other side here, you have the other heatsink on here, and as you can see, it's a little bit different design. It does have these grooves on here for better airflow and for cooling. And as you can see, there's a whole slew of pads on here. You have most of your UARTs actually on this side of the board. Now, the first thing here, you have your typical USB-C port on here, and as I said before, you can actually extend this and put this to a different location. And then you have your Bluetooth antenna right here. Now, typical with SpeedyBee products, you can connect this to your mobile device and configure this while this is in the drone. Now, besides that, you have all your UARTs on here. There's a lot of pads on here. I can see we have UART 3 right here. Then you have UART 4 right here in the corner. That one's gonna be, I'm sorry, difficult to get. Then you have UART 5, T5, and then you have T6 right next to it. Now, besides that, you have the pads here for your camera. You also have your pads here for a GPS if you want to include that. Now, in the corner here, you have your pads for a LED, and it's pretty small pads, but it is doable. Now, SpeedyBee is also releasing their lightweight LED for this drone here, and we've seen it before in their B25. Now, this LED is simply amazing, guys. I'm impressed of the quality and what it can do. In this drone here, it is configured to tell the status of this drone. And if you want to see that, I'll leave that link down below so you can see it. Now, besides all the pads and features on this drone, there are some components that we really can't see because it's being covered by these two heatsink. Now, the first thing here is a built-in barometer in here, and that will give you your altitude readout while you're flying or aid in return to home in case you have a fail-safe. And the second one is there's a built-in memory chip on here. This is around 8 megabytes of memory, and that can help with tuning and for data logging, guys. So there's tons of features packed into this one small little all-in-one board, and they've done a pretty good job. Now, if you want to see the performance of this new all-in-one, I've done a full review on the B25, and it also features that same all-in-one here, and it did perform very well. I'll leave that video linked right here so you can take a look at it. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.